So my name is Margrét Sigurjónsdóttir. I'm chair of the board of the Teaching Academy of the Public Universities in Iceland. And with me are Sean Scully from the University of Akureyri and Guðrún Geirsdóttir from Kennslumiðstöð, Center for Teaching and Learning at the University of Iceland, both also members of the Teaching Academy. And we would like to discuss the concept of student-centered, which is one of the criteria that are used to evaluate applications to the Teaching Academy, and something that we have learned that many people find difficult to understand. And I sometimes get the question, so what's the difference between being student-centered and nice to students? And there is quite a difference between the two. You can actually be student-centered without being nice to students, and you can be nice to students without being student-centered, although preferably you want both. But it sort of needs more explaining. What do we mean by being student-centered if we don't mean being nice to students? As far as I understand it and apply it, it's sort of the question of stating the question to yourself, or asking yourself the question, how can I make the course good for students to learn, or optimize student learning? But I'm guessing that you have a sort of a more pedagogical answer to that question, Guðrún, being an expert in higher education teaching.
Yes. I think this is a very good topic to talk about, because it is a confusing topic, and the definitions range all over. But I think in the course that we teach for higher education pedagogy, student-centered teaching would be kind of the core ideology of everything that we do there. So I'm just going to mention a few issues. First of all, for the way we treat it is very much related to learning theories. So it's seen as a part of constructive approaches, meaning that in order to learn something, you as a student have to make the connection. It's not something that is being poured into your head. You really need to be active in developing your own knowledge. And that means that students, you have to be, as a teacher, if this is the concept that we work from, you as a teacher first of all have to know a little bit about your student. Where do they come from? Not probably very difficult if you teach group of 400, but there are methods to say, what's the level of knowledge? What's their previous experience? What did they learn in the last course? So you need to, maybe that connects to being nice, is that you kind of have to know a little bit about the student group, so you can organize your teaching accordingly. And then that focuses on the student learning. So you also, as a teacher, we try to make or help them say, you have to be, if the focus is student learning, you have to find many different ways to have that come about. So student focus means being very creative about finding approaches and teaching methods and saying, okay, in this case, probably this is good, or for this group of students, this might work. So you're always focusing on the learning of the students. But it also means to us that you take students very seriously, that they're not just a group, that they are active. They need to be responsible in their learning. So they are responsible, but it's ours as teachers to make the environment as easy for them to take responsibility. So we have the learning outcomes, we have the good syllabus. So this is what we want you to do, but you have to be responsible for it on your own, and that they know also that they have different ways of learning, and that might not be my way. So, but they can approach it in different ways. And then just finally, what we are also stressing is, although we do have to memorize a lot of things, and of course, but the focus is more on maybe skills, mindsets, and agency. So they are going to graduate from us, and we don't want them to walk out with the overheads and say, this, I need this for the rest of my life, but I am able to be the professional in whatever field that I'm taking on. So that's also maybe focus on transferable skills, critical thinking, problem solving, and being independent. So that probably kind of covers what we, in the courses, we try to stress as student-centered approaches.
Yeah. So, Sean, you use student-centered in your organizing your courses. So how does this translate into just a lesson or a course outline, for example?
Well, I remember when I was writing my my application to the Teaching Academy, I ended up reading quite a lot of literature about student-centric learning, and I came across 4 criteria that basically say the student voice is really important. So the students need to sort of provide their input into the learning process. We also need to allow for, student voice and flexibility. So students are given a great degree of autonomy in terms of how they approach their own learning. This idea of competency-based progression is also really important. It's actually something that I personally struggle with. And also there's this need for continuous monitoring of students. So things like, formative assessment are incredibly important in the classroom. So the way I try to go about this in my own teaching is I find myself constantly asking for input from the students. How did this go? What was your experience of learning? Was anything confusing? Did I make any mistakes? Do you think I could do this better? But try to get their input so I can actually actively craft and mold the learning experience so it's continuously better and better after each year, but also so it sort of meets the needs of the individual students that are in front of me at any given time. So that's one way I try to go about it. And the other thing is, like, with continuous monitoring of students, I mean, I teach a lot of practical laboratory courses, like, where the students are in front of me doing stuff. So it gives me this. What was that?
You can see it. You can see
I can see it. Yes. And I can see it when they make mistakes, and, we can troubleshoot stuff, and it's fantastic because it gives me the opportunity to sort of get right in the middle of that learning process and, offer, guidance and feedback and check for understanding and actually have like critically minded discussions about, well, this way I asked you to do this, does this actually make sense in reality? Maybe you found something that's different or something that's not clear, or maybe based on your own prior experience, you can find a better way of doing this that I can use as an educator to sort of iterate on my own teaching. So that's kind of how I try to go about this process of student-centric learning. And I guess I'll let my students be the judge as to whether or not I'm actually successful at that.
Yeah. When you were talking and I was listening, I sort of popped into my mind. You remember that this idea about college students having, forgotten everything that they crammed for the exams 1 week after, and then 2 weeks after, and then 4 years in, they've forgotten everything. So I think that what you're describing really is the antidote to that. Sort of, you're describing a learning environment where the students internalize and learn in relation to prior knowledge to do things and understand things, not to, just like by rote memory, memorize the points on the slides and then replicate that in the exam and then walk out and forget about it. And that often means that the students have to do more. They have to be more responsible. They have to be more active. They have to hand in more assignments, even just for peer review, just to get the sort of experience of doing the project. So oftentimes students are not really feeling that this is for them. They feel like you're just being overly demanding, and they would rather have an easy, laid-back course where they can just listen to a lecture and think that's better for them. So how do we grapple with creating learning still sort of be nice to the students without it compromising their learning?
It's a challenge, and like I found there are 2 things that I think are really worth taking away. Like when I took a course in educational psychology, I literally came out with a laundry list of like, oh, I need to tell my students about all of these wonderful things, because when I was a student, I wish somebody had talked to me about like, hey, cramming for exams is bad. We all know that, but it turns out there are other ways of doing it. Like what's it called? Interleaved practice or spaced practice, where you study in like chunks over the course of a semester. I mean, it would have been great if I had known that. So I think we need to have conversations about how students learn, because there's so much information about this. And sometimes it makes us as educators, but does it make it to the students? Does it end up in their hands? In my experience, not so much.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I really love to ask my students, like, okay, if you're having a hard time with this course, if you're finding the workload is too much, come have a conversation about it. There's got to be a way forward. We can troubleshoot this problem and try to find, a way that works for you. I mean, it might not happen all at once, but, I think it's really worth having this conversation with the students.
I think you hit the key word, and I think like a conversation and trust, that the students get the feeling that you're not there to get them somehow, but you're actually there to support, because you really, really want them to graduate as full-fledged professionals, or kind persons, or whatever you are aiming for. So I think the conversation is really important, that we somehow get to get the feeling or come across the idea that we are here together. So it's not about you versus me as the teacher. It's not something, but it's something that I really want you to develop and become experts in my field, the fields that we usually all love. So we should. I think that the conversation is, and we forget. And even I've seen very good, keen teachers who are trying out new approaches. They come to our courses and they get all excited about different methods that they had no idea about. They want to try them out in class, but they do not prepare the students. So the students don't know what hit them. The teacher suddenly got mad or something. He's making us do all kinds of things. So I think the conversation and sharing of ideas, and then going back if it's met with good rationale from the students that we should do things differently. Conversation and dialogue is essential.
Absolutely agree that you have to prepare your students. You have to do the conversation with the students and saying, this is what I expect from you, and this is how we're going to proceed. But it's also important that we have this conversation, that we are not measuring or monitoring their learning in order to fail them. Yeah. Because I think there is this idea in the university system that, teachers want to fail their students, and, that you want there to be a bell curve. You want there to be, you want the exams to be there to measure or kind of test them, saying, oh, you're good, you're not as good. Whereas we are monitoring them to make sure that they're actually learning. But it can be hard, even for teachers and students both, to understand what is the difference of monitoring for the purpose of seeing, did they learn? And if they didn't, how can I make it better so that they actually can learn? Or are we doing it because we have to, test that it's the punishment?
Almost punishment.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that's interesting is to frame this. So, I mean, we've talked a lot about, well, collectively, I suppose, the difference between active versus passive learning. And I think what we need to do is we need to reframe our mindset when we come into this profession. I mean, teaching is not a passive profession. It's not, I wrote the lectures once, oh, I can record it now, great. So it's just completely hands off. No, we need active teachers, especially at the tertiary level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's another tendency. There's this tendency. I've done the lecture. I just need to read through my slides before the next lecture, or I can record it and then just put it online. And and then the question comes, what do I do with the students if the recording is online? And then we have the other idea that we have increasingly complex learning management systems like Canvas, and we can do so many things. The technology allows for so many things, but we also, when we're using that and being active in throwing things at students, we also need to think about, but how does this support the learning? Or am I just putting this new project in because I can do it, because it's technology is there and it's cool, and it's easier for me to do recording of the lecture because then I don't have to repeat it. um, you have to ask yourself the question, how does this benefit the student learning at the end?
And I think that's the question we should. That's kind of the core question for student-centered learning. How does what I do support student learning and benefit them? So I think that's the really important question we should always ask. Yeah.
So maybe we should just end with that.
Yeah.
Before every class, before every course, always ask yourself, how does this benefit the student learning? What are they supposed to learn, and how does what I'm doing benefit that?
Yeah. And I think as students, as teachers, when we're trying to find, the correct mode of learning, the correct modality, we really need to ask ourselves, have an honest conversation with ourselves, our students, and our peers. The way that we're teaching, does this best serve the students? What are the advantages and disadvantages of different learning methods in specific contexts? There's no silver bullet, and all too often I see my colleagues say, well, this new method isn't a perfect fit, so I'm just going to ignore it and keep doing, traditional direct instruction. It's really sad, because we're missing, tremendous opportunities, to sort of iterate and improve the learning environment, by just not occasionally taking risks and, making small iterative changes.
Yeah.
And we do have students, like you mentioned, student voices, so they are helpful in both telling us if we are on the right track, and then we do have more and more research and knowledge about, how, in which conditions, which methods work and do not work. And it's because I think I go around, people think I'm against lecturing. It's a lecturing is just a method. But and if you think about, is this the way that this in this case, in this place, in this context, does a lecture benefit students' learning? The answer could very, very well be yes. In this condition, this, maybe not 3 times 40 minutes, because we have a lot of research showing that you kind of fade out after 10, 15 of 20 minutes or what it is. But it's certainly, it's not the measurement of different approaches, because very different approaches and methods can be applied for very different purposes. And I think that's something we should just...
Yeah, and as you said, maybe not for 3 times 40 minutes, but, shorter lectures, broken up with mini projects and discussions, and that can very well work. But it has to be adjusted to what the students is supposed to learn, and the size of the class, and the size of the classroom, and the way the classroom is organized. Yeah, and
it's difficult as a single teacher to run group work with 300 students during the lecture. That is a big challenge. That's not easy. Nobody should think that, but it's possible.
It's not easy, but it is possible. Yes, and it shouldn't be done if it doesn't serve a purpose, because what I found from my personal experience is they don't do it.
Exactly.
That's just like, they're not participating if they don't see a point. And I think that what we're seeing is that students aren't participating in lectures because they don't see the point. So I think that's also something we need to take into account, that we need to know how the class is going to serve the students' learning, and we need to make sure that the students know this as well. It's not enough for us to know it.
Just referring to you, Sean, what you were saying before, like you teaching your students, or we know quite a lot from psychology about learning strategies and so on. We very rarely discuss that with students, and I think we need to kind of focus on also of metacognition, saying, okay, so how did you go about this? How did you learn this? Could you do that again? And so on. So they have to become also knowledgeable about themselves as learners.
Yeah, and actually, the whole concept of metacognition, or thinking about thinking, I guess that's probably a good way to describe it. Teaching metacognition, or how to think, it's one of my favorite topics, because it's such an abstract thing. How do you teach people how to think? And I've actually given this some thought. It's like, well, how do I teach people how to think? And like, one of my favorite ways to do this is to literally just think out loud. create a hypothetical scenario and then just ration through it as if I'm having a conversation with, well, myself, which is sometimes a little bit awkward at first. But I mean, I think once the students kind of, catch on, like, oh, okay, this is what's going on here, they can sort of pick up on some of those skills and just kind of hopefully run with it.
Yep. But I know that teachers are as bad at keeping their focus as students are, and we don't want to have this conversation too long, but student-centered is thinking about what we want students to learn and how we can support that learning. And it would be nice if teachers could be both nice and student-centered, but being nice to students doesn't mean you're student-centered. That's the bottom line.
Maybe you become nicer because you get to know students sometimes better in that kind of teaching, but
possibly
they are nice.
If the students are nice, we might be nice. No. Thank you both for the conversation.
Thank you.